Last year, the duo of Shamokiy and SwizzY moved from the Asia region over to EU to fight for the larger prize pools. And because Russia is a prize-restricted region, there are plenty of players who have tried moving from smaller regions to larger ones and have for the most part been unsuccessful. Muzz moving from OCE to NA is really the only successful example I can think of. To date, no smaller region players have even come close to a run at a European title until now. If you paid attention to this team, you'll know they've shown a ton of talent from the start. Shamokiy won FNCS twice in the Asia region, Chapter 2 Season 6 with Force and Alan, and then again in Chapter 2 Season 8 with SwizzY and Zotax. However, if you follow the Asia region, you'll know that the servers are located in Japan, but Shamokiy and SwizzY are actually Russian. So when Shamokiy won in Chapter 2 Season 6, two of the players of the trio were Russian, one was Japanese, and they actually learnt English together in order to win FNCS. Add on to that Shamokiy was playing on 50 ping, and you clearly have two talented players on that specific region. But again, just because they've done well on Asia doesn't mean that's going to carry over to the hardest region, EU. Now, they moved to EU at the start of the year, but they've had multiple moments where their name entered the conversation. SwizzY won 5 games of a solo victory cup, more than any other player in any region, and the duo placed 9th in Major 1. They were actually second after the first day, but unfortunately kind of choked on that second day. This weekend was the first qualifier for Major number 2, and they placed first, winning 3 of 6 games whilst streaming the entire tournament. In their first game, the bus path was a southwest to southeast, and since they landed the Citadel, this meant that they were gliding north, and they used this opportunity to take advantage of the players who are also gliding further north than them. Shamokiy lands at the north side of this POI and grabs a Havoc assault rifle. Using this, he tries to beam Dela and Pixie out of the sky, who land at Breakwater Bay. Unfortunately, he misses every shot. But at the same time, SwizzY lands to the very high point of this on the south side and also scouts players out of the sky. Now, he does not have an assault rifle, so he can't take any damage, but he does 2 critical things here. Number 1, he scouts to see if any players are landing on this eastern watchtower, and the second thing is that he comms the Axe Force and Vortexers are still flying through the air, and this allows Shamokiy to switch targets, but he just misses his opportunity. Just from the height advantage that Citadel gives them, they already understand where all of the players dropping around them currently are, and they'll take advantage of that information later. Since they both have OTKs near where they drop, they use these to speed up their looting in the early game so that they can disengage faster. You don't really need to worry about how much battery this is going to waste from the OTKs, because in a competitive game, most of the time you're not going to run out of ammo of these, and if you do, you can usually find another one. Since they land in the medieval biome up in the northwest, where metal is absolutely lacking, they ensure that they take every single piece of metal that they can find from their drop spot. Whether it's teaspoons, forks, plates, fire pits, whatever it is, they're trying to leave their drop spot with the maximum amount of metal they possibly can, because there's almost nowhere they're going to be able to reharvest it. Since they did a good job of scouting earlier on, they know no one's at the Warden's watchtower up to the north, so Shamokiy can rotate up here and gain even more loot and more metal. But if you look at his materials, you may notice something strange. 0 brick at this point. Now, currently the large bricks are bugged and they give incredibly slow materials, so it's not even worth harvesting them, as Shamokiy hasn't done here. Instead, he waits until he gets on top of the Warden's tower and harvests these walls, which are significantly faster brick, not wasting any time. This bug's frustrating, but they've made a great adaptation to their game plan to ensure that they're still as fast as they possibly can in their drop spot. The brick's one reason to go into this tower, but the second, of course, is that the Breakwater Bay team, Pixie and Dela, have to rotate around this area in order to get to zone. However, instead of rotating out in the open, they decide to go around the east side of the map, but end up bumping into Andalex and Diox, where they get into a little engagement and lose some HP. And there's some great recognition by Shamokiy to understand that the opportunity is no longer there to take tags on these teams from that position, and they might as well OTK back to the base and continue his strategy from there on. Back in the Citadel, SwizzY's been spending time harvesting materials, grabbing as much loot as he can, and capturing the POI. Now, this naturally will leave some leftover heals left behind because, they've looted the entire of this area and they have plenty to spare. And this means that now that Shamokiy is back in the base, he can look back over to where Pixie, Dela, Andalex, and Diox were and be a lot more aggressive with the damage he's giving out and taking in return, because he knows he can just go and use some of these leftover heals without wasting any that he has in his inventory. Now, despite the fact that they've scouted this eastern tower earlier on, SwizzY still isn't sure that no one's rotated there, and at the end of this zipline is a really common place for players just to camp, as you can take advantage of the players who are weak and vulnerable while going across the zipline. To counter this, I like that he jumps onto the zipline to start with to bait any of the players out, and then double kinetic blades up on top of the eastern tower rather than risking his entire game here. And of course, control of this tower gives you access to the hollow chests below. Now, from both of the towers they've placed themselves on, they've done a great job of farming Surge not only onto the Breakwater Bay team of Pixie and Dela, but also onto Vortex Xers and Axe Force up in the coastal drop. So really they have full control over this northwest corner of the map and anyone who wants to rotate past them. Since every game ends up in a heal off, it's important that players take 0 storm damage through the early and mid game. To avoid this, SwizzY rotates ahead of Shamokiy to give himself more time to rotate. And if you noticed, while he was looting, he was also staying more north while Shamokiy was looting the watchtower to the south to ensure that he doesn't get stuck down there and take any storm damage. So SwizzY in this takes 0 damage total, but Shamokiy takes 4 whilst going for the hollow chests, which doesn't really matter when it comes to storm sickness in the 10-tick zone. Now you may notice in their mid game, they use a ton of wood to rotate. Pretty much regardless of the meta, this is a good idea to do to avoid taking additional damage, wasting more of those heals that you've just spent so long trying to save, but also it'll save your harder materials. If you get beamed down to low HP and there's players around you, chances are you're going to have to waste some brick or some metal, and because that brick is currently bugged, there's less places that you can refarm it. So being a little bit more careful with your wood goes a long way. Good life advice. Now at this point, the third zone's appeared, and what that means is that the loot caches have spawned and are available for each team to go and grab. Now this is kind of the opposite of what we've just seen with them playing safe. They'll use their mid-game mobility, be it the kinetic blades or the OTK, and be out more in the open and actually risk taking more damage on this rotate to ensure that they get this loot cache. And the reason for this is quite simple. In order to win heal-off games, you need slurp juices. So they're willing to commit some of those heals that they've saved throughout the earlier parts of the game to ensure they get the 4 slurp juices from this mid-game objective. Now right next to where the combat cache had spawned, there was also an old base with no one inside of it. And since the combat cache gives you a bunch of metal, they decide to build up on top of this. I also like the play to throw a bunch of their additional heals into the base of this, which they'll be able to use later on. And you'll notice from this position, they're able to hold a lot of the same players that they had taken advantage of earlier on because they're all rotating from the same corner of the map. But if you're keen-eyed, you'll notice that Loot Island has also spawned in this area, and this gives them an opportunity to tag players out of the sky who are A, accidentally rifting, B, looking to go for the pulse rifles that are up here, and C, are just stuck in the congestion of this area. Yet again, they take this opportunity to heavily trade damage with the players that are around them, again losing some of their own HP. But because they've saved so many heals throughout the entire game and got the loot cache, before they rotate, they have all of these additional heals that they can just drop down, pick up, and ensure that they're fully stacked before they go. So whilst rotating to the 5th zone, notice that both of them have capped metal, almost capped brick, great wood, and 2 sets of max heals, and they're 755 above the Storm Surge threshold. So up until this point, they've played this game almost perfectly. Now, when they land from this rotation, they end up building in brick, and from this position, they easily manage to pick up their first elim of the game. Now, if you notice, they've rotated themselves away from the edge, so they're far away from the congestion on this east side, meaning the brick box that they've built makes sense. However, where they land in the 6th zone is straight into the edge where a lot of these other players will rotate into, which again we call the congested side of the zone, and because there's going to be a large amount of players around them dropping near them, it's very likely that they're going to be focused if they sit in brick, and this is why at this point they choose to build in metal. And they do the exact same thing going into the 7th zone, but it's server lags, so we can't see it. They get some good RNG and they pull the 8th zone, so they start to look around for a refresh. At this point, there's a player below them who seems to be a solo, so they invest a ton of their AR ammo to spray him to get the lobby to focus him. You may think this is going to be a waste of assault rifle ammo, but they're both carrying red eyes, which are not very useful to spray in endgame. Plus, since they managed to get the elimination here, SwizzY can swap his red eye for an SMG, which has capped ammo. Not only this, Shamokiy manages to get another 4 chug splashes and a pizza. At this point, they have 232 builds total and more than 60 seconds of heal off. And remember, up until this point, SwizzY has taken 0 storm damage. The game has already been won. Throughout the next 3 moving zones, all they need to do is not make a mistake. Shamokiy leads and he double kinetic blades and lands on a high layer, ensuring again to box up in metal. SwizzY beautifully follows him like a shadow, always ensuring his crosshair is placed right behind him, which makes him land on the exact same box, a mistake a lot of players make. Since this is essentially their rotation done for the first moving zone, they do take a bit of time to look back and see if they can pick up any refreshes, but this is unsuccessful. Shamokiy then sits in the cone and tries to scout out what high ground is doing and realizes that their players already cranked up all the way for it, and they could go for this, but it's too risky of a play at this point in the tournament. In the second moving zone, the 10th zone, they double kinetic blade. However, this time they actually go up and then the second blade cut diagonally across the lobby and falls straight down to low ground. The small amount of storm damage that Shamokiy takes here is kind of irrelevant because he's not going to be the one playing heal off later on. However, SwizzY does make a mistake in taking 1 tick of zone, which could lose them the game. Since they've landed at the edge of zone, which is the dead side, and the zone continues to pull far, they can just stagger from this position, wait till the zone catches up, and then use a single use of the kinetic blade to land in equivalently the same position, the front low side. You'll be shocked what they do next because it's stagger, and then single kinetic blade landing low ground again. But this is where they make a huge mistake that could have cost them the entire game. The zone pulls back in the same direction, and since they've used the kinetic blades, they don't have a tarp down below that they can walk back through. So they instantly try to use the kinetic blade to fly back to the front side of zone. However, since this zone pulled back and this is a zone transition, players are safe in their tarps looking around for eliminations, and as Shamokiy starts to fly through the sky, he gets beamed all the way down to 8 HP and luckily survives flying through the air because that player just missed a pump shot. Again, because SwizzY does such a good job of landing in the exact same spot that Shamokiy is, he can take over this tarp using metal to ensure they don't get lobby focused, and this allows Shamokiy to pop a slurp juice and get his HP all the way back up. He continued to tarp through the rest of this zone and continue to tarp the entirety of that 12th zone, the final zone as well. He can do this for multiple reasons. Number one, the zone changes this season were pretty bad, meaning the moving zones are much shorter, and if you go into endgame with a kinetic blade and good materials, you can just basically tarp the whole thing. Kind of boring. But also because they did such a good job of conserving the materials all the way through the early game, the mid game, and of course getting that refresh going into the moving zones helped them out big time. As I said, the game was won before the zone started moving. Now that final zone starts to close in, SwizzY runs all the way back into the tarp that they've created to start the heal off, and since he's only taken 10 HP of storm damage the entire game, this means he'll have 59 seconds in storm until the storm sickness kicks in. First thing he does is pop the slurp juice, then he uses the pizza, picking up the additional slices in case another player starts to spray him and he has to move. Finally, he uses the chug splashes last, and this is because if he uses these earlier, it again alerts the other players to his location, meaning that they could find him and fight in. What an exciting finish. We love heal offs. But of course they won this game, and they also won 2 more games, ending up first overall with a massive lead. I was really impressed with how solid these guys' early and mid game strategies were. And if you want to see more for solos, you can click right here and see why it's so hard to fight Mr. Savage. Like and subscribe. Peace.